Bonjour, bonjour. Welcome this evening. Welcome to Understanding. I think one of the topics that both Dr. Steph and I are most excited to talk about, looking at longevity, looking at how genetics can really offer insight into disease that either prevents that or makes longevity less desirable of an outcome because you're not necessarily enjoying those years. They're not healthy years. So let me welcome Dr. Stephanie Nielsen to our midst tonight. It is so lovely to see you this evening, Medell. How are you?
It's wonderful to see you. I always love getting to spend time with you. Eventually, we're going to get to be in the same room. We get to be in the virtual rooms a lot, but I look forward to being in the same room soon.
Me too. Me too. That will be a true delight. It's a very odd experience, I think, for me to come across your face and your voice almost on a daily basis at this point in time, and yet our paths have not crossed. Yeah, that happened with myself and Kashif. I think I knew Kashif virtually for 3.5 years before I met him.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Pandemic, right?
Yeah. But we've all learned to live a little differently. And I think that is so appropriate for what we're going to talk about tonight. Is so many people are learning to live with chronic disease. In fact, some of the new statistics show that people have 1, 2, 3, 4 different disease states that they're being labeled with, and they just have to live and manage those.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that we want to share is that, there are things you can do. And one of the powers of what the DNA company does is we have 73 genes that we follow. That's not all the genes, there's over 20,000, but 73 that are actionable with chronic diseases, some of the major chronic diseases. I see a few things that people are already putting in some very specific, and we may not be able to touch on each one of those, but we'll be able to show you some of the categories of things that will be maybe related to those. And most importantly is you have the power in your hands, in your DNA, to make change. And you may not know how much power you have, but we hope by the end of tonight, you understand the power you have. You understand, if you don't have your DNA done yet, the power that's the potential and how you can heal yourself. And I know, Krista, you've had a healing journey. Do you want to kick it off with your healing journey and what DNA is meant for you?
Yeah. Oh goodness, my healing journey. I was kind of I feel like my DNA to an extent normalized my experience. I was always that sick kid, right? The kid with rashes and eczema everywhere, the kid that never felt well, the kid whose GI tract did not work, especially feeding all the skin stuff there. And so I think it was a combination of my own gently investigating my body that led to a lot of my understanding. But then once I got access to my genes, it really accelerated that because it was no longer an observing and an experimentation, for lack of better words. There was more clarity as to what exactly I focused on, right? So for example, before my DNA results, I had a sneaking suspicion I was celiac, but anytime I would do testing or anytime that I would kind of go about different measures, nothing came forward. And then when I did my gene panel, sure enough, there we are, all the red flags. And so that really, I guess, to an extent, justified, normalized, validated what I had been experiencing. And then coupled to that, especially since I have really poor detox pathways, right? And that really shows up in the way that I eat and how sensitive I am to what is around me, the environment. So again, being more discerning as to specifically what detox pathways, at least in my own body, aren't great. And then how do I go about supporting that? So again, I'm not doing absolutely everything because I like to be living. I don't want to be just being healthy. Being very fine-tuned and precise as to the measures that I'm bringing into my health to better support those. So I think it was a combination of curiosity and, motivated by I wanted to feel better. But genes really coming in and fine-tuning and expediting, for lack of better phrases, where I put energy and effort. Yeah. And what about yourself? I know that I think you've traced a similar path, haven't you? Insofar as most healthcare providers, we're very curious about our own current state of health. It's what brings us to healthcare many times. And then I know that once you learned of your DNA, it also shifted things for you.
It did, because I was that sick kid who could never gain weight. I was the sick kid whose eyes would swell shut if I went into someone's house and they had a cat. And even if I didn't see the cat, my whole face would swell shut and I couldn't breathe. I lived in the Midwest and part of the Mid-South, and we'd have what's called a thermal inversion, where the clouds would come in and trap all the pollens down. And
Mhm.
I would wheeze,
Girl,
and
yeah,
I would, not be able to breathe, or I was, and when we would go see providers, they would say, she just has a weak immune system. Now, at the time, because I'm old as dirt, at the time, they didn't understand how important gut health was.
Mhm.
And fast forward, we had no men in our family on my father's side that lived past their mid-50s because of cardiac disease. And my grandfather on my mother's side, my maternal grandfather, died in his early 70s of a stroke. So I had cardiac disease coming from both sides. Um, Big disclosure, we were celiacs, but we were undiagnosed celiacs.
It happens.
And
It
in
happens a
my
lot.
aunt's case, hers turned into mental illness. And so one of the things that a lot of people don't know, that gut-brain connection, her celiacs turned into a Hashimoto's, turned into bipolar disorder, turned into unresponsive major depression. My grandfather had major depression and cardiac disease. My father was an undiagnosed celiac. I was an undiagnosed celiac. Mine was more autoimmune. So when all of a sudden I get this DNA that says you can't eat wheat, my family were wheat farmers. I mean, our living was made growing the substance that was killing us. That's why none of them lived past the age of 55. But then I developed the big C at 21. I had cancer. So I'm a ripe old age of 21. I'm in pharmacy school because the most powerful person that I'd ever met was a little local hometown pharmacist who gave all these wonderful, try this, try this, try this. And I loved his common sense advice, and how people come back 2 days later and say, I'm healed, I'm cured. And that to me was magical. And so fast forward, I was able to go to pharmacy school. I became a medical researcher. I quickly decided that medical research is not what I wanted to do, but stayed in pharma for 10 years, teaching proper ways to prescribe and utilize drugs. Then I
Mhm.
felt like I was in the belly of the beast and left, only to heal, not using medicines, but to use food, supplements, and naturopathy. So that's when I went back and got my board certification in clinical nutrition. And I have found that walking that east-west combination between having targeted tests and labs to document what the biochemistry and the function of the body is, and then, sometimes drugs are appropriate, sometimes naturopathy is appropriate. Diet is always critical. I'm not judgmental one way or the other, but I know most of what Western medicine has become is symptom stomping. I want to heal. So as an undiagnosed celiac, as someone who has a couple autoimmune diseases, as a family history who is a wreck genetically, I've still lived a beautiful life. So there's promise.
Girl, please be mindful of your tensing. You are living and will continue to. Dirt
You know
continues
what?
to
I've
live.
always
Dirt
said
is a
I'm going to
very
be 100.
alive
I'm going to be the
thing.
hottest 100-year-old there is out there.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. I love that. I'm looking as you were sharing your story, I was looking in the comments, and I think my experience, at least with eczema and all the glory that came with that, and I think your experience with celiac, there's a lot of people resonating with that. And we're seeing that, especially that autoimmune spectrum, right? Those things kind of all tend to, not necessarily the eczema, but at least the autoimmune alongside celiac all tend to coalesce. So I think as we continue through our evening, those will have to be things that we make sure we touch on, because I know you and I are both very passionate about it, given we're the two silent celiacs at the party that require all the gluten-free things.
Exactly. In fact, speaking of that, let's see what our audience is here for and what they're looking at so that we can really talk to them. And Anne, you know what? I love it. I love you as old as I am. Well done. All right.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, a nice happy smattering across the board with a lot of focus in both gut and cognitive decline, which again, of course, fair enough. We've all witnessed a family member whose mind has declined before their body has. Yeah. Yes. A majority of people being interested in that, and then a fair smattering around what we'll call metabolic disease or cardiometabolic disease. So either that's with your cardiac system, or that which the way you manage your foods, how you manage your blood sugars, your fats, your proteins, all that fun. Yeah. No, we have a happy mixing, and I'm glad to hear that too, right? I think a lot of time when people, the old conversation, I think when we talked about longevity, would always think about these really big events, right? I get cancer, I have a heart attack. And we would forget about those slow, insidious things that statistically speaking are the killers of most people. You can correct my number, but I think it's around 35%, the leading cause of death in the world. And this sits about 35% of the reason people die is cardiometabolic issues. Is that not correct? Somewhere in there?
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that I've realized is, and this especially went through COVID, those people that were exposed to COVID and had either the most residual, the long COVID, or the most dramatic presentations tended to have genetic pathways that didn't work. And a lot of those were metabolic pathways. And we kind of had the cutting forefront information going, wow, this person's really sick and there's no reason they should be sick. And then you look at their pathways and see that their mitochondria aren't working, their blood sugar dysregulation, their detox pathways. So, I think because cardiovascular disease and diabetes are so big, and so much of the population is whether they're a little bit overweight or whether they're obese. What do you say we start there? Because I know once we get started on gut, we may forget everything else.
Yeah, I think that's a wise, and why don't we kind of start off with a marking point within the DNA that really sets the stage for cardiovascular wellness, namely cardiovascular inflammation, and then interestingly how that can butt out into things like skin for those eczema folk out there.
Sure.
Yeah, so where we'll start this evening. So for those, it seems like a majority of our audience this evening has our test, namely the DNA 360. So if you want to,
so pull your test out, because we'll talk a little bit about the genes, and we also want to talk about some solutions for you. So some things, if you're not mindful of them yet, things that you can do on your own at home, because I think self-empowerment is one of the most important things you can do.
Yes. Agreed. And not kind of bowing and just saying, because I have this gene, it's all for none, right? That sounds like a very boring life. Yeah, so we'll start with 9p21. So this was unearthed maybe 20 years ago, 15, 20 years ago. And it was initially found in high correlation with people who had major cardiac events. So think of heart attack, think of stroke. And what was found was there's this region of the genome, 9p21, and those people that suffered those instances at around 60 or so tended to have what we'll call a very high G. G is in Gregory, G count. Okay. And so what this means is, at first we said, okay, if you have this gene, it probably means you're going to have a heart attack. And what we learned, and this is important to the end of prevention, those with a higher G count, right? Higher being 4 Gs or more, so 4 to 6 range, those people tend to have an increased rate of cardiovascular inflammation, right? So let's talk about the cardiovascular system just real quick as Steph raises her hands, raises the roof, right?
4 to 6, here I am.
I'm a 6. I'm a solid 6.
There you go.
The history that you have on that one side of the family, that they all have issues. I have the same story. My father's side, it's a refugee family, and none of them, we don't know much of that health history because it is lost to that. But there was tales and legends effectively that people did not live past the age of 65. Right. And sure enough, that kind of mirrored even within my family along my father's side. And this guy is likely part of that story. So cardiovascular system, right? We think of heart, obviously, but then we have to think of this incredible, wonderful network of arteries and veins that span the tip of your head down to your toes, right? So heart is pumping blood, and it's that cardiovascular network that is spinning this blood about the body, right? So we're talking about all of the lining of these arteries and veins, right? That is constantly in contact with blood and constantly working, right? It's doing that gas exchange, it's doing that nutrition exchange. You know, save the heart. This system is probably one of the most worked systems in the body, because without air, you're not going to be here. So it's always working. And so what this gene really helps us to understand, that surface area, how sensitive is it? You know, when faced with something that can be an adjuvant, something that agitates it, is it going to have a proportionate reaction, or is it going to kind of explode, right? A good analogy is think about a bug bite, right? You know, people who get a bug bite and they're like, oh, that's bothersome, and then it's done. You know, it doesn't really itch, it doesn't really swell. And then the same, you know, a person beside them gets that very same bug bite and it explodes and it gets really itchy and they have it for several days and then they have scratch marks and all the fun things. Kind of think of it like that. Everyone's cardiovascular system, the same bug bite, different people based on 9p21 are going to be responding differently, right? So Steph, do you want to dive down the whole little bit of cardiovascular inflammation and why we care about it, why we care about that sensitivity to when this lining is agitated?
Well, and I want to point out a couple of things kind of along the way. 11% of your body is the arterial flow. And I want you to follow these numbers. And 10% is the venous flow. So you've got about 21 to 24% in there that are the outgo and the intgo, but 75% is the micro circulation. All the good is happening in that micro circulation. But if you're not moving, that microcirculation becomes stagnant. That's why they say sitting is the new smoking. So how do we get things moving? One, you get out and move. I mean, you've got to pump your muscles, because the only way to pump those muscles is to get that oxygen and nutrients in and get that waste product and inflammation out. The second thing that you can do is there are PEMF mats, pulsed electromagnetic frequency mats. You know, in 10 to 20 minutes, you can move your blood like you walked 5 miles. They're a little bit pricey, but if you have cardiovascular inflammation, let me tell you how important it is to every day be moving that blood. You can take supplements that have like nitric oxide, like beets that will open up, vasodilate, so you don't have a tight vascular system. And you know that the very thin layer in that cardiovascular system is called a glycocalyx. When you can keep that glycocalyx intact, you're less likely to have claudication and then have a blockage and a problem. So the first thing, if you have on your DNA sheet, I want you to look, if you look at 9p21, it'll say 0 to 2, like 2 to 4, and 4 to 6. So I'm in the 4 to 6. Dr. Kosterman's in the 4 to 6. So it shows, yeah, it shows us that we have a tendency toward that vascular inflammation. So immediately we know it is part of the responsibility in our personal health. We have to move. You know, there is no excuse. I don't feel like it. There is no excuse. Well, maybe tomorrow. We know. So when I work in clinic, I put in 11 and 12-hour days. And with those 11 and 12-hour days, I do not sit down at all, because I am just like going from place to place to place. So I'll put in 15,000 steps in those days. Now, I'm not running. However, what I'm doing is I'm constantly moving, and I have a PEMF machine, so I use that, to upregulate and downregulate. And I have a very clean diet that is an anti-inflammatory diet. So 1, 2, 3, even though I'm set up for the possibility of inflammation, the things that I'm doing combat that. And remember, genes are not, you're not doomed to your genes. Your genes are like a house. Now you can drive through a home development, and the houses may look similar, but one may be decorated country, one may be modern, one may be shabby chic. They're all decorated a little differently depending on how the homeowner does it. And somebody might redo, somebody might have granite, somebody might have formica. What you do, that's the epigenetics, how you're decorating your house, both inside and out. So you've got the template, but how do you customize it? That customization is really going to be how those genes either modulate and turn on and trip you up or don't. Now, Krista, there's a couple other things I could go into, but are there other things you'd like to add right now?
To 9p21?
Sure. Or just in vascular inflammation as we start going through.
No, just while you were chatting there, or sharing with us, I was looking at the chat, and there's a little bit of confusion where to find 9p21 in the reports. So we do report on it in a few different spaces, but I'd highly encourage people to go into the cardiovascular report. If you look at the summary for 9p21, it will very specifically say, here's how many Gs you have. So you can get an answer from 0 Gs all the way up to 6. And so that would be where I would orient you if you're trying to figure this out this evening. Yeah. No, so I think where I'd like to start directing us to is to the point that you just made, that just because you maybe, like us, have a higher G count, that does not mean you are someone that per se is destined for heart attack and stroke. And so we have to think about, how do you intelligently go about offsetting that, right? What can your genes tell you? What do you focus on? And so I think there's 2 opportunities here. We can talk through other cardiovascular genes, right? You've already mentioned a little bit about that. Nitric oxide, blood pressure, things that put pressure on that arterial lining, right? And then separate to that, we also have to think about, again, what these conduits, these tubes, these arteries, these veins are ushering through the body as blood. So we have to think about effectively the toxin load within there, and how are you cleaning that up? Because the greater the toxin load, because you're not cleaning it up, or if you live in an environment where you're inundated by those things, that's going to put a burden and increase that inflammation of the cardiovascular system. Yeah, so I know, Dr. Seth, you briefly spoke on nitric oxide. Do we maybe want to talk a little bit more about blood pressure, especially ACE, and how that can lend into more undue pressure on the cardiovascular system before we jump into the beauty of detox?
Sure. So when we look at the ACE system, and as a pharmacist, I deal with this a lot, because the angiotensin converting enzymes are enzymes that will regulate blood pressure. And when we've got an ACE gene that talks about, are you going to respond to that? Are you not going to respond to that? Are you more sensitive to blood pressure issues or not blood pressure issues? One of the things that I think is critically important, just on a practical method, is that people know, what does their average pressures run? Okay, a lot of times people forget that each one of these numbers is a target. And that target, you don't have to be perfect on the target, but you do have to know your target. So my blood pressure runs generally low. So I will run 100 to 120, and then I'll run maybe 60 to 80. If I'm getting 120 over 80, which is considered normal, I'm actually high. Part of that is adrenal exhaustion. Part of that is my size. Part of that is, a lot of other things, but I know my normal. And I think it's really important to have all of you know, you have a PhD in you. You know how you feel. You know what works and doesn't work. You know when you feel like, gosh, this just isn't right. I want you to own that this just doesn't feel right. Whether someone has the right answer for you, you're digging through till you find what works for you. I mean, both Dr. Kosterman and I had to dig through to find the right diet, the right practitioners, the right lifestyle to help us heal. And so I think it's also really important to understand, that at least once a year you should get serum blood panels so that you can monitor and look at, the blood sugars and the other numbers that are going to relate to this detoxification.
Yeah. Yeah. I think what Steph is saying here in particular around becoming an advocate and the number one person who's aware of and championing for health is very important. I see often people come into my office, especially people who are in around 50 or 60, and they're like, oh yeah, I'm starting to get high blood pressure. Oh yeah, my blood sugar levels are starting to go up. And I'm like, oh goodness, well, let's work on that. And they're like, oh, but that's just supposed to happen. And it's almost like because we have a culture where once you hit a certain age, 50 or 60, people are like, oh, well, you just kind of get sick and you start crumbling. It's this belief that this is inevitable, it must happen, and there's nothing you can do about it. I find that very concerning because I think, when we talk about illness and that what stands in the way of longevity, there's an element of society and the way we think about health stands in the way there. And so I would really offer, especially people who are kind of in that middle age arc where they're like, oh, this should start happening. I would categorically say, absolutely, it's not supposed to start happening. Dr. Steph, you're very open about this sort of thing, but can I ask, like, you're older, has any of this stuff started happening to you? Are you accepting it?
No, I fought it every step of the way. So I'm 61.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I never tanned, I'm 75% Irish and then, 25% Scandinavian. And everybody's like, why can't you tan? Why can't you tan? I would get
You go
white,
from white to
pink, and
tomato.
white. But I would laugh as a defense mechanism and say, when I'm 60, I'll look 40, and when you're 40, you'll look 60, because they would coat themselves with baby oil and then just get, as dark as they could. And we didn't even understand back then about all of the things that the sun was doing, or all of the things. But now what we're able to see with our genes is by fighting that inflammation. And because I had cancer at such a young age, to go, boy, I called myself a vegetarian. I called myself a vegan, but I was a breaditarian. I was a sugaritarian. I was a dessertitarian. I was in these 20s going, gosh, I like really sweet drinks, and I'm old enough to drink, so I'll have sweet drinks. I like dessert.
Yeah.
And I had a bumper sticker that said, eat dessert first. You never know when the world's going to end. I liked fruit salad. I liked, an occasional pizza, or maybe a veggie prima pasta vera, whatever. But there wasn't nutrient dense foods. Now, I was raised with my uncles raised cattle, and then we grew the wheat and those type of things. And I helped my grandmother cook. She was an amazing cook. But I left all that because that seems so passé. That seems so old fashioned. And I didn't want the small rural Kansas to rub off on me. I was a city girl now. I went to professional school.
It's
And so
amazing
to
how we
end
try to
up,
get
they're all
so far
healthy,
away from who we are only to come right back.
only to come back and go, why did I ever leave? Yes. And so, to realize that all the sugar, all the carbohydrates, the lack of nutrient density was killing me. And then I literally had a resident who was from India say, you don't need all this medicine. You need to change your diet. See, my allergies were so bad and my cancer was so bad. They wanted to give me a bone marrow transplant. They wanted to wipe out my immune system. I would have 3 months in isolation. And what would they have fed me in a hospital? Mac and cheese, maybe grilled cheese, maybe pie and pudding and popsicles. First of all, I
It would
can't
even be
have
the good
dairy.
version of that stuff too. It'd be the hospital version of that.
I can't have dairy. I can't have gluten. I can't have sugar. That's the only thing would have fed me. So when I wipe out my immune system and take $1 million worth of medical debt, then it would have been no regrowth.
Yeah.
So I didn't know about my DNA then, but what he said was find yourself some little nutritionist. And I remember this, find yourself some little nutritionist. And I was quite offended, but I was like, well, what would that cost me? And he's like, 2 to 5 grand. And I'm like, 2 to 5 grand, $1 million, 2 to 5 grand, $1 million. So I found myself a little nutritionist. She was 4'11". She was 82. She was Italian. Her name was Sal. She kicked my butt and saved my life. She put me on a severely restricted diet and 145 pills a day. Now, I swear to you, I will put no one on 145 pills a day.
Yeah.
Everything was individualized, B6, B12,
It's a way
Paldiarco,
versatile
acrylic
diet
acid.
there.
I mean, individual. But I took 40 plus pills at every meal and my body healed. And we changed my diet and I had a severely restricted diet for 2 years, but my purpose was bigger than my problem. Had I had my DNA, had I had a certified genetic practitioner who could walk me through, hey, you are most suited for this. Hey, you might want to consider this. I would have been able to shorten that journey and stay to it. Because once I got well, and she pronounced me well in 2 years, within 1 month, I went back to where I was. What happened? What happened to all this? Because my skin had cleared up, my sinuses had cleared up. And she said, what did you do? You wrecked my masterpiece. I said, oh, I went back to eating everything that I love, that I've deprived myself of for 2 years. And she said, no, honey, that stuff's over. Well, I wasn't ready to admit that yet. So off and on for several years, I flirted with it. And each time I'd get worse. So it's kind of like a cha-cha. 2 steps forward, 1 step back. 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And that's called life. But now having this information, working with people to watch them really go, I've been sick my whole life. I wish I'd known. I mean, the greatest gift is to get your kids done or to share your results with your kids and say, you've got at least part of this and here's ways to work on it.
Yeah.
But the beautiful thing about that is we have actionable things that can really give people choices.
Yeah. And let's continue down that rabbit hole of the choice and how we become more aware of ourselves. So I think in regards to cardiovascular inflammation, we've talked about the element 9p21 that sets the stage, and then a few of its, curating elements, ACE and then NOS. Okay. Why don't we talk about the other side of that which cleans the blood, our detoxification, that which kind of is always rubbing up against our 9p21, our arterial lining. Why don't we talk a little bit about that? Do you want to, I think I've seen, my inclination usually is methylation because I think that's such a misunderstood thing, but let's make sure we also save some time for the GST family, because I'm seeing within the chat a lot of people asking after GST in particular, since we know it relates to so much. So let's start with methylation.
Sure.
Why don't we start with what exactly is that? Because I think often when people come to me and they're like, oh yeah, don't worry, I already know about methylation. I've had my MTHFR done. I'm like, oh, interesting. Okay. So methylation is one gene. Good to know. Good to know. Why would you like would you like to kind of kick us off and dispel that thought, dispel the idea that methylation can be boiled down to a singular gene? And I kind of wish it was, because that would make my job easier, but you can tell people my job's more difficult.
Well, I think I can give them hopefully a relatable answer about when we talked about cardiovascular disease, and in our family, we had high homocysteine. Now, that's not something that's usually checked on in your blood work. So if you have cardiovascular issues in your family, always ask for a homocysteine. Homocysteine is an accumulation due to a lack of methylation and breakdown. And so that's a clue that you have methylation problems. The big buzzword out there is MTHFR. Okay. So people are like, I've had my MTHFR, I'm fine. Well, I kind of thought the same thing. I've had my MTHFR, I'm fine. Well, mine is kind of suboptimal. It's in the middle. I have maybe 30 to 35% activity, but I've got some, doggone it. But when I came to the DNA company to learn that there are multiple genes that methylate, and the methylation is the detoxification or moving it from a substance to maybe a less toxic substance. We've all every time our body goes to detoxify, we have glucuronidation and methylation and oxidation and all these things that are moving along. We take food and we break it down into pieces that we can use. We take toxic substances and we break it down into non-toxic substances. One of the things that a lot of people don't know is there is SHMT1, there is MTR, there is MTRR. And each one of those works on a different piece. So then I hear people say, well, I'll just take methyl Bs. Now, sometimes they can find them, sometimes they can't, sometimes they're super expensive and they're like, well, I don't think it's worth it. But methyl Bs, and this is the way I describe it, I'll see if what you think about this. I tell them that they're almost like they're pre-digested. They're already hooked up with a methyl group. With, for you chemistry people, is a CH group. They're already methylated, so you don't have to do the conversion because your genes are showing that you can't convert. And yet, in my enthusiasm, learning something new, I wanted everyone to have methylated Bs until I watched people who had genetic problems spin out and become too hyper and high strung and feel awful. And I'm like, oops, that you can't do the swing to either end, that 10% that can't methylate, then the 10% that over methylates. A lot of us are in the middle and there's a whole rotation. Now, as our chief scientific officer, you have the meat to really dig into, but what I have found is, again, there's this dance of we need to methylate. We need to see, do you methylate on multiple levels to convert homocysteine to methionine, to use your methylfolates, because all of those processes are processes of detoxification.
Yeah, yeah. I think my favorite analogy when we're talking about methylation to really ring home how much of a team effort this is, and forewarning, I do not do sport very well, so this is a rough analogy. Apologies to those that do sport. I like to think of a basketball team, right? When we think about the sport of basketball, there's two elements, roughly. There's a bunch of people that pass a ball back and forth, trying to get it to the top of the court. And then at the top of the court, there's a person that's going to shoot the ball and get a basket, not a goal. I was corrected once upon a time on that. So the team that passes the ball back and forth, and then the person that shoots the ball to the end of a goal or basket. So close. Okay. So
it's okay. We love you anyway.
Thank goodness. I wouldn't survive out in the wild if you didn't. So a lot of time when people say, oh, I just know my MTHFR, it's kind of like saying watching a basketball game and only watching one player. So sure, do you know, does that player have the ball? Can they pass that ball well? Absolutely. You know that individual element, but you don't know, basketball is a team sport. You don't know what else is going on. This also lends to the analogy of there are people who are really good at that team sport, passing the ball to Steph's point, possibly, inactivating that homocysteine, attaching methyls here and there. They could be great at that, but the person at the top of the court is me. Good Lord, I couldn't shoot a ball if I had to, right? So all this teamwork is all for none. And then there's other people out there, and I'm myself included in this group. I can't pass the ball for anything, but my gene that indicates that person who shoots the ball is spectacular. So there's a lot of nuance here that goes into how you support your methylation. And it is all to the end of supporting your body. Methylation is something that will detox things, detox offending agents within the body. Hormones will also detox the brain insofar as it will inactivate certain neurotransmitters, right? When we think about one of these pathways that facilitates a lot of life, it facilitates DNA, methylation is it. And so knowing the full team, knowing how well your team plays together here is very, very important. And I would offer something that as you progress, there has to be adjustments of that. So for example, right, we talk about that person who's shooting the ball. That's the person that's attaching that methyl group, detoxing things, inactivating hormones or neurotransmitters, whatever it might be. There's going to be different points in your life where you need more support, right? If you've just been sick, if you're incredibly stressed, if you're coming up against your period, right? Those are moments where methylation is going to be called on more. And so those are moments where maybe you're introducing some more of those methylated B vitamins compared to in the Northern Hemisphere, at least right now, it's summer and it's joyful. And maybe there's not as much taxing the body. And so you don't necessarily need that. I would say knowing how your basketball team works, how your methylation works is incredibly important. And then getting a little bit nuanced as to how you further support yourself, especially in times of stress, so that body is not remembering that stress in the sense of its damaging body is really, really important. And I think our testing does a spectacular job of that. Bar none, I haven't seen a methylation report that kind of mirrors ours, at least in what we consider of all the players on that basketball team in sports.
And I hope the people who are writing in the comments that say when they read their methylation, it was a little confusing to them, can relate to what Dr. Kosterman just said with the team players. So we report on 4 genes, and those 4 genes, one talks about the 5-methyl tetrahydrofolate. One talks about optimization of being able to methylate. One talks about conversion from the homocysteine, which builds up with inflammation and goes to methionine. So you may be great, like she said, at methylating with the 5-tetramethyl hydrofolate or MTHFR, but you may suck at passing the ball. So you can't get your homocysteine to convert to methionine. So the thing is, you have to look each individual gene. Okay, am I optimum here? Am I suboptimal? Am I really not good? And then we look at the portion and say, okay, I have the 5-MTHFR, and so I can methylate. I just can't get it over the hump. What else do I need? So somebody who can't convert homocysteine to methionine needs to add trimethylglycine, TMG. So you would use your methylated Bs with some TMG to help yourself get over that hump. You also would want to eat maybe less red meat, because it's a lot of the red meats that have so much and then raise the homocysteine. So there are little nuances like that. I will agree with you. When you first start your genomic journey, the letters are confusing, the nomenclature is confusing. Take what you can take, whether it's 1 or 2 genes, and play with those. How can I go from point A to point B, see some results, and then you say, well, what's my next priority? What's my next priority? Now, if you can do it yourself, because there's a lot of available information out there, great. But if you need help, whether it's a one-off episodic consult or whether it's a small series because you have serious health issues that you just haven't been able to get over, then working with a functional genomic practitioner that actually is used to interpreting the data can help you get through and give you those points on, you do this well, you do this poorly, consider this, pull back on this. And that's literally what we do all day, is interpret the confusion so that you don't have to, sit and go, too much, I'm in overload.
Yeah. Sometimes I feel like when I was first approaching and trying to learn methylation, it felt like I was going back to school for another undergraduate degree in biochemistry.
Exactly.
It's a lot to absorb on the first go, and I find revisiting the report can be helpful, but then also having those conversations with people, and it's something that can be quite life-changing. I'll offer a story from my own experience before I think we move on to the GST family. But for about 25 years, I was completely plant-based. It was a warm, fuzzy decision on my part, and I flipped to plant-based when I was around 12. And so at the time, maybe not the brightest crayon in the box, but I was like, I'm just going to get the best form of B12 because I know as plant-based, I'm not getting B12 anywhere else. And so I got the active form because I was like, oh, that must be the best form. So from the age of about 12 until 25 years later, in my mid 30s, 37-ish, or no, sorry, until maybe my mid 30s, so like just before 35, I was taking methyl B12 every single day. And then I got my genetic report back and it said, you cannot, from a genetic enzyme perspective, manage methyl B12. And it's you just can't. You can't. It's kind of like saying you got some players on the court, and when you throw them a ball, they stare at it and then it drops. Right? Yeah. Yeah. You got a bunch of crystals on the court, it's not going to help. And I was like, oh, interesting. Okay. So I stopped taking it, and mark my words, within a week, it almost felt as if clouds had been removed from my brain, in the sense that because I've been dosing myself improperly and really oversaturating my enzymes, my genes with something they couldn't manage, with a ball they couldn't deal with, right? It's like giving a weak player a concrete ball. They can't deal with a normal ball, concrete isn't going to help. It really shifted just my mental clarity. And then it shifted also a few other health parameters, in particular with my skin and how quickly that was able to recover. So it's again, I don't say that to the end of you maybe are going to be promised similar results, but more to say that methylation and the right supplementation there is incredibly important. I took one supplement out of I changed it, right? I changed the form of B12, took that out, marked health improvement, which, again, to me is the end of knowing your genes is important, right? There's a shortcut there, but then also not abusing nutraceuticals, herbs, vitamins, etc., as if they're benign agents, because they're not.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's a real valid point. Is I love supplements, I love herbs, I love food, but food is fuel and supplements are biochemistry, and they work with your biochemistry, and biochemistry is your life. And so it's critical that just because somebody's promoting the latest, greatest, and you wanted to talk about the GSTT and GSTM, glutathione, everybody says master antioxidants, goes back and forth and turns on, and everybody needs glutathione. Everybody needs nanoglutathione. Everybody needs, lipid glutathione.
It's the cat's meow. Hey, skip that. Just toss it into your body. IV it.
Yeah. But not everybody can process it. So if you look now, if you've got your DNA, let's look at your GSTT, your GSTMT. Let's look at what does glutathione do for you. And it can be really awesome. Again, kind of like when we were talking about the 9P21, you get how many copies do you have? And I know that some people got a little lost on the 9P21. If you have 0 to 2, that's better than if you have 4 to 6. The lower the number, the less likely of having cardiovascular inflammation. So the more you have, the more you have to be careful. So in GSTT1, you want more. Now this time 2 is good, 0 is not good, because you want to have the enzyme activity and the clearance and be able to detoxify from pharmaceuticals and reactive oxygen species and xenobiotics and different hormones. And so you've got to have these to detoxify.
Yeah. So while we're talking about numbers and a few other things here. So most of our testing looks at SNPs, single, well, I always mix this up. Single nucleotide polymorphisms one day. So most of it kind of looks at the letters that make up your DNA. For things like our GSTs, by and large, we're looking at something called copy number variation. Okay, and the easy way to understand that is I like to think about that as how much information do you have? How many instruction copies do you have? If you have more instruction copies, namely if you have 2 copies, right, you have a lot more information to make what that gene does, compared to if you don't have that information, right, you have less information to go about making it. So what does this GST family do? So this GST family stands for glutathione S transferase. Okay, and this is very important. So this family does not look at how do you make your glutathione, right? By and large, people are pretty good at that. It's one of the most important antioxidants in the body. By and large, everyone's good at it. Where people differ and where not everyone is created equal, to Dr. Steph's point, is how we transfer glutathione as transferase, transfer that glutathione onto the toxin, right? So the more enzymes, the more transfer enzymes you make, the better you are at cleaning that stuff up, okay? So to an extent, if you're looking at GST, T1 as in Tom1, 2 copies is ideal. You're spectacular at cleaning up heavy metals, oxidants within the body, really keeping that blood and other systems clean, okay? GST M1, Michael 1. Usually it's ideal if people are sitting at in and around 1 copy, okay? No copy is less ideal. 2 copies when we talk to autoimmune, and this might need to be just looking at the time, a different day we talk about that. 2 copies of M1 can be a little bit more complicated. We'll speak to that. So for M1, you're looking to just 1 copy. And then lastly, GST P1, Peter 1, okay? We're going back to SNPs here. And the ideal for that guy is going to be AA as in Andrew, okay? The less ideal forms there being AG as in Andrew Gregory, or GG being Gregory, okay? And so this will kind of speak to, you know, you have all this glutathione, this master antioxidant. How are you at attaching it to the substance, right? And I saw some questions there in regards to who are the people that should or should not be getting glutathione IVs, something very popular, something especially for medical conditions. You think of long haul, you think of a few other things, can be very helpful. But those who have a poor profile in how you transfer glutathione are not great candidates for it, right? Because again, these suite of genes does not speak to how do you make it. By and large, we all make it really well. But if you inundate the body with glutathione and you're not able to attach things, you kind of have all this glutathione floating around the body with nothing to do. And I think the phrase is, you know, the devil loves idle hands, because what happens is this glutathione, strongest antioxidant in the body, with nothing to do, bumbles around the body and is like, cool, where are oxidants that I can go mess up? Because that's what I'm attracted to. And you know where it finds those oxidants? Within the mitochondria. The mitochondria being the primary part of your cell that creates energy and has a lot of cellular DNA immune system directing. So this thing that you've just injected into your body for very good reason, right? People don't inject things with nefarious purpose. For good reason, is now going into their mitochondria and causing havoc, impacting its ability to make energy, impacting its ability to direct cellular function, right? So when you look at your GST, it will firstly tell you, are you good at attaching? If so, great. You know, that supports a lot of the detox that we've been talking about. Separate to that, if it's not so great, be mindful around the IVs and be mindful as well to the toxin exposures, right? Prevention, when people are like, how do I improve my glutathione? Like, well, less exposure if possible.
Mhm.
Right, so.
And I think that's one of the biggest things, that when people look at, you know, where are the areas I can start with? And the biggest thing is not what to add, it's really what to take away. The exposures of perfumes or nail polishes or chemicals in hair care or all the fragrant plugins. Oh my gosh, I can tell you those just drive me crazy. And the things that you have in your environment, let's get them as non-toxic, as holistic as possible, so that your body, if you have a problem with that burden of not being able to detoxify, you're not constantly building up toxins. And so it's really important that if you don't put bad stuff in, you get less bad stuff that you have to pull out. And then you have to do less of the detoxifying and less of the saunas and less of the, you know, all the things. And I'm loving that some people are saying, oh my gosh, Dr. Krista, that was so helpful. I had no idea that it was all about having good stuff around that wreaks havoc. You've got too many bodyguards.
Yeah.
But if you can't get them in the places where you need them so they can do properly, you're actually just destroying, because they want to go save somebody. So they go in and they wreak havoc.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's usually done with good intention, right? I think for better and worse, North Americans have this mentality of, more must be better.
Mhm.
And that's, medicine is proving that to be not true. Many areas of life are proving that to be not true. There's an element of balance is better.
Yeah.
And so for people with a poor GST profile, not inundating the system is the balance of that. Yeah.
Now, I know we're getting close to the hour. I'm wondering, should we switch to gut real quickly, or is there something else you'd like to touch on? Because I feel like what we've been able to, even in the handful of genes we've talked about, I'm hoping that people have taken away, wow, there's a lot that I can pull from my report. There's a lot maybe that I glossed over in my report, or I didn't understand the importance of it. And you can go back and dig into your report and really look at that. But also, there is some really neat stuff that we're working on that we want you to be aware of coming down the line. So,
Yeah, well, why don't I think we saw a lot of questions around gut, so why don't we kind of transition? And I have a transition point that will kind of marry us in
great.
a little bit. Yeah, I think, and then we'll make sure we make a point of answering some questions, because I want to make sure we honor the audience and the engagement they have with us. So I alluded to GST M1 Michael 1, right? Being something that was a little bit more of a complex interpretation there, and it involves the gut, right? So a lot of, not exclusively, but GST M1 supports a lot of the detox within the gut, right? Not exclusively, but a large portion of it. And this kind of very much then bleeds into gut health, microbiome health, right? And so I said, ideally you're looking for a little bit of a middle of the road with GST M1, right? 2 copies is too much. No copies is not enough, right? And so we're looking for 1. And why is that, right? So we know that within our gut, ideal health, ideal longevity, ideal digestion, ideal all the things, ideal immunity, ideal mental health ideals can be seated within the gut, and namely the biome there. And so there's this happy symbiotic relationship between our body and the biome, right? We're arguably more bug, more biome than we are people from a cell basis, right? And so GST M1 really looks at, this analogy might be a little uncouth, so I apologize, but it really looks at how are we policing our gut? When we think of a community, when we think of the police force, there's an element of balance there. We want them to be going after the offenders, people who are wreaking havoc and causing issues. That said, we don't want them going after the bad or the good guys, right? There's a balance of the police, and just like in the gut with GST M1, 2 copies is too aggressive. The police are going after the good guys. 0 copies is not aggressive enough. They're letting the bad guys run things. And 1 copy tends to be that happy medium, right? And so this is our transition to gut health, in that one element, one way you can access from a genetic perspective, are you set up for a gut success, right? Can be looking at your GSTP1, where you fall on that spectrum, too aggressive, not aggressive enough, or Goldilocks in the middle, happy, right? That could be, I think that's our transition there, right? And that also dispels a little bit of confusion around the GST M1 that we were speaking to.
That's great. That's great. Do you want to tell them about the special we're running for Labor Day and what it means for people to be able to, take that and run with it?
Yeah, and so Voice of God, hold me honest, because I feel like I always put the wrong deals out there. So if you go to our webpage, we are now offering bundled. I know the Voice of God will hold me accountable, and I'm grateful for it. We are holding bundled deals, right? So now the idea is, when you purchase several tests of ours, 2 tests, there's a 10% discount. I know I should know this, 10% discount, and it's applied automatically in the cart. So if you're part of the small percentage of our audience that does not yet have the DNA 360, that can be purchased coupled with one of our other tests, right? So potentially that could be our Gut 360 that looks at all the biome, right? Or separately, and could be an interesting for those that are looking towards longevity, and what's preventing that is our DNA aging test. Okay, so our DNA aging test is to me, a very interesting test that looks into the body and tells us, how is the body experiencing our age? right? So everyone, you know, the way we societally track age is how many times have you been around the sun? How many, every rotation around the sun is a year. And so people track Stephanie's 61. I am 38, I think. I don't count very well. I think I'm 38, somewhere around 38. Someone will educate me later how old I am. I don't know. But that does not mean my body thinks it's in and around 38, nor does Stephanie's body think it is 61. Right. And so one way that we can measure this, how is your body experiencing time as opposed to just rotations around the sun, is we can take a look at your DNA and namely the methylation patterns on top of your DNA. So one way we age, right, is, you know, we have DNA, and over time, as we experience more and more time, more and more assaults, right? Assaults being you're not sleeping well, you're not having a proper diet, maybe you're smoking, these sorts of assaults, that will tack methylation, methyl groups onto your DNA. And with the beautiful power that is computers and laboratory science, we can actually look at your DNA and we can look at these patterns of methylation and we can assess how old does the body actually think it is? Does it think it's been around the sun 38 or 61 times? Does it think it's been around less, i.e., it's not experiencing those assaults, and so it actually thinks it's younger? Or if you're exposed to all those insults, right, does it think it's older? And I think this is a really, to me as a clinician that works in preventative medicine, this is an exceptionally helpful test in my mind, in that sense of it's hard to convince people to do preventative medicine, right? It's hard to tell someone like, hey, you should eat well and exercise every day, and I have no evidence that it's going to help you, right? Other than the way you feel, I have no evidence that it's going to help you. This is one of those tests that actually helps you gauge and helps you understand that you're aging slower because of your health practices. And for the competitive folk out there, right, you can always see how much you can push that age down compared to the first time that you got it. So in the longevity bundle, if you're getting DNA 360 and then you're getting the DNAging, buying those two together will get you $115 off the retail price. And that discount is automatically added when you add them both to cart and then check out. I hope, voice of God, I got that correctly.
Yay!
Yeah, you nailed it. Got it.
Sorry?
So the additional discounts is already 10% off regularly when you purchase them together using the longevity bundle, but we do have some additional discounts, which we have given everybody attending tonight early access to, that will automatically apply at checkout.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome.
Wonderful. All right.
So why don't we answer a few of these questions?
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
I like the first one from Janice about what is the story with eczema and what gene wise. I'm going to answer it non-gene wise, and to start with, and say, I want you to look at your skin, which is your largest organ, as the outside of a donut. And the inside from your mouth to your anus is technically outside your body, and that's your gut. So whatever is happening in your gut, as far as erosion, as far as breakdown, as far as a messed up gut, often is reflected on the skin, because the skin is trying to push that toxicity out. So people that have eczema and psoriasis and recurrent or histamine type reactions have gut issues. And so you're going to want to look at your FUT2, which is your microbiome part. You're going to want to look at your HLA, which is your gluten sensitivity, which, as you heard from the very beginning, Krista and I are both celiacs. You're going to want to look at your AMY1, which is your carbohydrate. Like my AMY1 is rocking. That means anytime I have something sweet, it tastes even sweeter. I love sweets, so all I did was eat sweets. But then I turned on all that cardiovascular inflammation and developed cancer. So the things that I would look at is look at the things that have to do with gut health, microbiome, and like I'm lactose intolerant, so I don't do cheese. I can do a little bit of maybe goat cheese or a hard cheese that's low in lactose occasionally as a special treat, but I am strict gluten-free, and I do all sorts of things with probiotics And the cleaner that I got my gut and the simpler I got my diet, not less selection, but just simpler and cleaner I got it. Skin is radiant, hair is long. I can grow my hair longer now than I could as a kid. I could never get it here. And now it's kind of this goal to see how long can she get it to go? And it's fun. It's fun. And then, to add all these other things to see and to know those targets and see what is happening in your body and then demonstrate the results is really exciting. So for gut health and for that eczema, for eczema and skin health, look at gut health.
Categorically agree.
Yeah.
I think it's one of those, I think from a genetic perspective, right? Our company by and large doesn't look at disease defining genes, and there are a few out there that can be correlated. And I think our new hosting of genes that we're putting out the new year will speak a little bit to that. But I think of the ones we have currently, right, looking at HLA, so that defines are you celiac or gluten sensitive, exceptionally important through that gut, and then kind of needless inflammation, right? Looking at your 9p21 as well, especially those with the higher G count, tend to have skin that is more sensitive to Stephanie's donut analogy, the skin that makes up a lot of the linings of your cardiovascular system, of your GI tract, are also out here. So there tends to be a greater sensitivity there. Oftentimes poor methylation and or poor detox as well, agents that will offend and slow repair. And so I think my first and biggest advice mirrors that of Dr. Steffen so far as clean up your diet. And then if there's still struggle there, in particular around some of the healing, right? Then looking a little bit deeper into the genes to do some of that refinement in regards to detox, in regards to, it took me a really long time to take gluten out. Croissant is a deity of mine, and it took a really long time before I was convinced I needed to. Yeah. So that would be my thought there. And I hope that's helpful, because I appreciate there's a lot of people struggling with atypic, or they struggle breathing, they struggle with their skin, they struggle just kind of with allergies in general. Your GSTP1 in particular is going to be a big one there. And if you have an AG or a GG combination, really looking at the environment that you're living in. Is there mold present in your home? Do you live somewhere like Vancouver, for example, where there's a lot of those little mold spores in the air? Things like that might also really shift it from an environmental perspective for you.
One of the next questions is about insulin resistance, and we didn't get to do our insulin resistance kind of like we talked about, but maybe you can talk about one or two genes that they can reference in their profile that for insulin resistance, and we can talk a little bit about metabolic health for a minute.
Yeah. The biggest one I'd hang my hat against, just like we use 9p21 to ground for our cardiovascular wellness, the equivalent within the metabolic space would be a gene called TLC. Oh my goodness, it's
TC7L2.
Yeah, that one.
We even have problems with it, and we do this all day. They just sometimes it's just end of the day, and you just go, meh.
All I'm like is TLC, I think. It's a bunch of letters that start with T. TLC7P2. I don't know. I can't. There's too many letters. But what Steph just said, that is where I would hang my hat against. Okay. And so what this guy mainly is going to tell you is, are you at increased risk of insulin sensitivity? So the way your insulin responds, right? We think of insulin sensitivity as kind of like a door and a bouncer, right? Insulin's that bouncer at the door that, whenever someone's trying to get into the club, they're like, cool, you can come in, you can come in, you come in. But if you're asking that bouncer to work overtime and let too much in, eventually they're like, this is too much, I'm going home. And it stops doing its job, right? It stops opening that door. And so blood is kind of sitting out, sugar is just hanging out in the blood and not able to get in, right? So this gene doesn't tell us, this gene really tells us how early, how quickly, how agitated that bouncer is going to be and how quickly he's going to quit. Some people are going to have bouncers that are willing to stay longer. They'll be able to endure more of that, increase of sugar, whereas other ones are going to, bit of a diva. After 2 or 3 people, they're like, I'm going home, I'm done, you deal with this yourself, right? So TCF7L2, yes, got it. That would be the first one I would look at. The two supporting there, Steph, do you want to do Amy1 and then SLC?
Yeah. So I know we had a question about the Amy one, and Amy one really it's such a great one to play with, because if you've ever had a piece of bread and said, oh my gosh, this just tastes so sweet, and you're just like, oh my, it's wonderful, and somebody else goes, it doesn't taste that sweet to me. That's an Amy one example. Or it's because when the carbohydrate breaks down on the tongue and you have this perception of extra sweetness, as well as you have the amylase that breaks the down, and so then instantly you get a spike in your blood sugar. Now, I want you guys to remember, insulin is a regulatory hormone that grabs sugar and stores it. It is a storage hormone. Your waist is directly proportionate to how much your storage hormone is working, or how much your adrenals are in overworking, because there's cortisol there. So when we look at our waist right around our belly button, and our waist keeps expanding, one thing we need to look at is our insulin no longer able to store, or is it storing too much? And when we have too much storage because we have too many carbohydrates, or we have simple carbohydrates that dissolve into sugars, and remember, starch is nothing more than a string of sugars, then we start putting on that weight because we dissolve so effectively that we come to instant sugar, and that sugar, the body goes, oh, I'm in the land of plenty, and it stores it away for the future. So really, longevity is about controlling your metabolic health so that we have tight ranges and not these big swings.
Yeah. I think to Steph's point, a lot of current research, when we ask the question of why do we age, many different theories, but a lot of them are starting to really hone on, you get older when these metabolic processes, including insulin, start to break down. That is part of the how and why of us getting older. Because again, we think of the cardiovascular system and all that the blood is carrying. If it's carrying junk, including sugar, right, that is further clogging things, especially that microvasculature that feeds the brain, that feeds your skin, that feeds your fingertips, right? It's that breakdown that then lends to a lot of the aging process. Yeah, so knowing how you engage with insulin, knowing how you metabolize, like digest and metabolize your carbohydrates, really, really important as to where you place focus on within the diet. Yeah. Did you want to talk on, I think we still have some time. The other one, I know this is a gene you absolutely love and are passionate about, so I don't want to steal your thunder, is SLC30A as in Andrew 8. I got it this time. My brain got a bit of a shock when I couldn't even put out my TLC gene.
Well, is there a part of it that you are more interested in, or?
Well, I would love if you want to explain how zinc interplays with insulin, right? So namely, so this gene, what it does is it really looks at how well are you able to absorb and transport zinc, right? And Dr. Seth very beautifully articulates how that is going to influence and impact insulin.
Well, yeah, I think one of the neat things in our report, which was a new phenomena for me, was understanding that not all the supplements that we take can we actually absorb. And so when you take it, just like we were talking about the glutathione, you've got to make sure that you can actually utilize. So when we do the SLC30A8, we look at the association with increased fasting glucose. So if you're an AA version, you significantly associate reduced fasting glucose in response to taking zinc. So if you're taking zinc daily, and it's usually like an average of 14 milligrams, then your blood sugar will stay more stable. Now, zinc is a fabulous mineral, and it's great for reducing viral loads. Okay, you may have heard that over the last couple of years. It's great if you have the AA version or the AG version at reducing blood glucose. Again, we talked about in the very beginning that we've seen people with better metabolic health have better long-term aging, have fewer disease, so that the true healthy aging has to do with metabolic health. But if you have the GG version, there is no association or a very insignificant association with your total zinc. Now, does that mean that zinc isn't good for you? No, that's not what it means. But it means if you are an AA version, your zinc goes, you get more bang for your buck with your zinc. So knowing about that for your mineral status, for your DNA status, for your glucose status, zinc can be a real winner in your family for immune health, for metabolic health, and for all-round mineral in your body. Big, important stuff.
Yeah, no, thank you. And thank you for sharing, because I know that's one of your favorite, James. I think I always hear you talking about it. Yeah. We'll have to do a survey at some point, every clinician's favorite gene. All right.
I think we have time for what, one more?
I think, yeah, a few more. I think
Okay.
we can probably honor most of the questions in here.
Okay.
Why don't we go to just a little question going back to methylation. So Lydia is asking, which DNA is converting homocysteine to methionine? MTRR is our question. So it's a little bit of a tag team effort. I would look both at MTR and then MTRR. There's a little bit of a passing back and forth of the ball there. Okay. And then I would really look at MTR. So just one R of those two, just singular MTR. That would really tell you, do you respond positively to a methylcobalamin supplement or not? Okay. So if you're suboptimal in that space, I'd highly recommend a non-methylcobalamin or non-methyl B12. Okay. If you're optimal there, there's other considerations, but you have more options on the table. So it's MTR and MTRR that supports that. The next question I see from Becky, she's asking, if you've no copies of GST-T1 or your GST profile in general is suboptimal, what do we think about NAC? So NAC is N-acetylcysteine. It's a supplement that's a precursor along a few other elements to glutathione. I love NAC for so many different reasons, but as a precursor and a support to glutathione, absolutely. Because again, your issue with the GST suite is not making glutathione, it's transferring it. So having NAC, having the building blocks so that you're always able to make your glutathione is absolutely appropriate. And I think especially following COVID and a few other investigations of viral illnesses, especially with the brain, NAC is a really beautiful support, not only of glutathione, but also of a lot of supporting the integrity of the blood-brain barrier. So this is kind of one of those, just like zinc will support several different facets, immune system, blood sugar regulation, etc. NAC is something that will support several different facets, and absolutely, it's a beautiful thing even for those without optimal GST1 or GST family. I think let's just see. Someone's asking. They're asking. They've offered their GST profile, and just could this be why they can't fully heal the gut? I'd offer there's a lot of different variables that go into the gut therein. So it's not to dismiss your question, but I'd really encourage you to talk to a clinician, because if you're trying what you know within your resources to heal gut and you're not making that next step, I'd highly recommend talking to a clinician, because they're that extra set of eyes, they're the eyes of like, have you thought about that? And you're like, oh, I didn't even know about that. So I'd really encourage that. But it looks like you have a beautiful profile. that will enable support, at least the glutathione contributing to the gut healing there.
And I like how you said that when you work with a practitioner, it is not about just somebody telling you you have to do. It really is a conversation. What have you tried?
Yes,
What
ma'am.
has worked? What have you found? And we have the time because we work in a space that works not in a 7-minute increment in and out and squash a symptom. It's really what diet have you had and what supplements have you been on and what tests have you had and what have you tried? And then by looking at the profile and looking at what you've tried and said, did you think about, or are you aware of, or how would you feel about? I know Camille is asking about a list of clinicians, and that's something that you can write the DNA company and then they can send you. And I know that we're updating on our website. We have in-house clinicians and then we have other practitioners. And I know a lot of our practitioners come tonight, to get more information. But we have over 30,000 practitioners all across the US. So we can refer you to somebody if you want to sit in front of them. And then like Krista and I, we do telemedicine and, consults with people after they have taken their profile so that we can help guide them. And it really is this intimate, safe space of, have you thought about, have you tried, are you open to, and what do you think about? And I just had a lovely, lovely consult today of someone who had had a lot of issues. She was in her late 60s. And we had gotten together and then she'd missed a couple of her appointments just because life had come up. And we finally reconnected after about 10 months. And she had so many things resolved because she took action and because she really listened to what she had been doing and tweaked just a few minor things based on what her DNA. And she's like, my cardiovascular has been resolved. My GI has been resolved. My sleep has been resolved. My energy is back. And to really see somebody who was ready to love themselves enough and embrace change, because after 68 years, she's like, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. This is supposed to be my golden years and I don't feel golden. And she does now. And that is just so rewarding to see somebody who was ready for change and ready to take those steps. And she's like, sometimes I fall off and then I see how bad I feel and I get back on. I said, we've all been there.
My journey with croissant. My journey with croissant.
Your croissants.
Yeah, no, but I love that idea of the collaborative medicine, right? Because I think a lot of, because I have the background in computer science and naturopathy, things that people don't necessarily think go together, I'm huge on collaboration because I think traditional medicine informs me. Conventional medicine informs me, computers do, right? I think it's negligent at this point in time to say that AI is not influencing how we practice medicine, but that's all for none if the person before you isn't open to or buying into it. I think people's preferences and how they want to action and realize their health are almost as important as the options that we put before them. And so getting into a safe space with a clinician that you trust and that you feel you can have that back and forth with to land at the best plan meaning what you can actually do, right? That's important because it's all for none if it's not something you're willing to do and it's not something that you're willing to choose into.
Yeah.
I think that's a happy little conclusion to our evening or afternoon, depending on where in the world that you're calling in from. Dr. Steph, any closing thoughts before we
Just, I appreciate how many people stayed, all the way to the end. That just really shows how interested you are in your health, in taking charge of your health, in taking action with your test, and then digging in and learning a little bit more. And you can always reach out to the DNA company and they'll help you find somebody in your area. They'll help connect you to a functional genomic practitioner, or they'll refer you to DNA University, which has become a certified training ground for lay people as well as practitioners to dig more into DNA. And Krista alluded to that our 73 genes have been so impactful, but we're going even deeper and we're going to expand that and that will update all of yours. So the more that we get concrete information that we can take you from A to Z or A to B, then we will add those genes, we'll release those, and we'll let you know. And so I'm so thrilled with all the beautiful feedback. I'm so thrilled that you're so interactive and dynamic. I mean, we are live, we are real people, and we are, you know, here because we're passionate. We're passionate about health. We're passionate about healing. We both don't like cutting edge. We like bleeding edge. We don't like to bleed, but we like bleeding edge science that we can share so you don't have to wait. And you're all early adapters as buying into how can my DNA impact my life. And we're just glad you're here. We appreciate your time. We value your input a great deal. And we take care. God bless you.